Great to see you all again. I was away last Shabbat. It feels like I've been away for a bazillion years, and it's so wonderful to be back. And I've been on vacation. I've been with my family, taking a break from stuff. But I've been thinking about what I wanted to say today for basically the whole time I've been away. And there are two reasons for that surely, but they both make complete sense, of course. One of them is that it's been the holidays. In case we've already kind of like etch-a-sketch erased that experience from our brains, we have been experiencing the holidays a lot in the past couple of weeks. And this year, of course, Hanukkah began on December 25th, Christmas Day, and ended, or I guess it ended on January 2nd technically, but the 8th candle was on New Year's Day. So I'm part of an interfaith family, as I think all of us know at this point, and I know that some of you are too. So it's been a whole lot of holiday overlap, and how do we experience this? How do we navigate this? There's a lot going on. So that's one reason I've been thinking about what I wanted to say for the whole time I've been gone, but also because this time of year, and especially these holidays kind of all converging like they did this year, reminds me of this Gemara that I learned in Israel when I was on my year of study abroad. It's about the winter solstice and the winter holidays, and I really wanted to share that with all of you this morning in our learning. And perhaps at the end, we'll speak a little bit and give a nod to the weekly Parasha, because it's all connected, of course, to the weekly Parasha. So here's the Gemara, because as you know, I always love to think about Gemara. This is from Masechet Avodah Zarah, page 8a, for those who are following along at home. And we start with the Mishnah. These are the festivals of Gentiles, meaning non-Jews: Kalenda, Saturnalia, and Critisis. And so we're going to focus on these first two festivals, Kalenda and Saturnalia. In the Gemara, Rav Hanan bar Rava says, when are these two festivals, Kalenda and Saturnalia, celebrated? Well, the answer is Kalenda is celebrated during the 8 days after the winter solstice, and Saturnalia is celebrated during the 8 days before the winter solstice. Okay, so we have these two important holidays kind of bookmarking the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. And so with regard to the dates of these festivals in this time of the year, our sages taught when Adam HaRishon, the first human being who ever existed, Adam, the first man, saw that the days of the year were progressively diminishing. He saw that the days were getting shorter from the autumnal equinox until the winter solstice. He did not yet know that this is a normal phenomenon. He'd never experienced this before, and he got really concerned, and therefore he said, "Woe is me! Perhaps because I sinned, the world is becoming dark around me and will ultimately return to the primordial state of chaos and disorder. And this is the death that was apparently sentenced upon me," said the first human being, "from heaven, as it is written, and to dust you shall return." Genesis chapter 3, verse 19. And so Adam HaRishon, the first man, arose and spent 8 days in fasting and in prayer, because he's like, it's my fault that the days are getting shorter, the light is going away, the light is never going to come back. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that feeling, but Adam HaRishon was very worried about this, and so he spent 8 days in fasting and prayer to ward off the diminishment of light forever and for all time. It continues. Once he saw that the season of Tevet, so we're in the month of Tevet right now, i.e. the winter solstice. So the month of Tevet doesn't exactly coincide with the winter solstice, but roughly it does. We'll get into that a little bit later. But once Adam HaRishon saw that the season of Tevet, the winter solstice, had arrived, and he saw that the day was progressively lengthening after the solstice, which is the time we're at right now, he said, clearly, this is how it works. First the days get shorter, and then they get longer, and this is how the world works. And then he was like, wow, this is great. The light's coming back. And he went and he observed a festival for 8 more days. Now, upon the next year, he observed both these 8 days on which he had fasted the previous year and these 8 days of celebration after he saw that the days were getting longer as days of festivities. And so the Gemara concludes, Adam HaRishon, the first human being, established these festivals for the sake of heaven, but they, the Gentiles of later generations, established them for the sake of idol worship. Okay, so now so the Gemara feels not quite so awesome about interfaith families as we do today. I'm glad that we've changed in that direction. But I want to make a note of this number of 8, that we have 8 days of the fasting and prayer. We have 8 days of celebration. We have 8 days of Hanukkah. What is the deal with the number 8? Perhaps 8 is an interfaith number? Well, I learned from my teacher, Rabbi Mel Gottlieb, who, God willing, will be here as a scholar in residence a couple months from now, that the number 8 represents the spiritual within the spiritual. I'm still kind of trying to figure out exactly what that means, but I find it compelling. The idea that the Brit Milah is done on the 8th day, that we have 8th day of Hanukkah, and when we have all 8 candles lit on our menorah, it's Zot Hanukkah, the fulfillment of Hanukkah. This idea that Shabbat, the number 7, represents the spiritual within the physical world, but the number 8 somehow transcends that and represents the spiritual within the spiritual world. And so when Rabbi Mel Gottlieb gets here, we can ask him more about that. But back to this idea of these 8 days of festivities, these 8 days of celebrating around the winter solstice. Jews do it for one reason, for the sake of heaven, and non-Jews do it for another reason, for the sake of, let's say, a different sort of recognition of the spiritual, which the Gemara says idol worship. Okay, I think this captures some of the tension that at least some of us might feel around being part of an interfaith family. How do we navigate that? And so here's what the Gemara has to say, and I think this is one of those things that we can study it and then say, okay, what do we agree with and what do we disagree with? So it's taught in a Baraita that Rabbi Ishmael says, Jews who are outside of Eretz Yisrael are considered to engage in idol worship unwittingly. How does this occur? In the case of a Gentile who prepared a feast for the marriage of his son and invited all of the Jews in his town, even though they eat kosher food, and even though they drink kosher wine, and even though they have their own separate kosher dining section, which is great, the verse says that they are still somehow doing something wrong because they are with non-Jews in celebration. So again, the Gemara considers it very problematic for Jews and non-Jews to be in relationship, but we've found in our day and age that there are sometimes tensions with that and sometimes blessings from that. I think it's important to recognize that Jews and non-Jews are different, sharing sometimes similar values but different traditions. But I think that at least in my family and in my experience, the danger comes when we say, oh, it's actually all the same. No, it's not all the same. It's different, which doesn't mean it's bad, but it's different. So, and I think also, especially, celebrating this time of year, celebrating Hanukkah, and even, recognizing that Christmas is also celebrated in Israel, that's one thing because it's a Jewish nation. But here now, we're in a non-Jewish nation, and so Christmas is a different thing even for Jews. So this wonderful scholar, Nechama Goldman Barash, she teaches Talmud at the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies, Matan and Midreshet Torah Va'avodah, 3 institutions in Israel. She writes this, and she's talking a little bit about the same Gemara that we just studied. She says, as an American immigrant who's been living in Israel for over 30 years, I still love returning to the U.S. in December to experience the twinkling Christmas lights that bring a feeling of warmth and comfort when driving or walking through the streets of my hometown. We even had a childhood tradition of driving through neighborhoods to see the most ornate and colorful displays. And she continues saying, while I appreciate that my holidays are reflective only of the Jewish calendar, there are moments I miss those lights. I was having a conversation with someone earlier this week who was sharing that her family's tradition on Christmas, this is a Jewish family, not an interfaith family, but they would go to Disneyland because there was no one there. It was like the best time of the year to go to Disneyland because it was, completely vacant and you could get on all the rides. So it's an interesting tension that we experience. But I think especially for those of us in interfaith families, but even for those of us who aren't, being in a non-Jewish country at this time of year. And also recognizing that this is a time of year that for Jews and non-Jews, just like the Gemara explains, is a time of special recognition, celebration, and pause. So we'll continue reading a little bit more in this piece by Nechama Goldman Barash. The winter solstice, the shortest day of the year in the Northern Hemisphere, occurred, she's writing in 2021 that occurred this week on December 21. It's December 21, December 22, always around that time of year. It can be in a time of intense loneliness. Daytime ends early, and with it often comes cold and rain, driving people indoors and enhancing feelings of melancholy. But, this is the good part, it can also lead people to seek out company and join together for meals and socializing to ward off a sense of isolation and despair. And this is kind of the blessing of this time of year. It is hardly a coincidence, she continues, that for thousands of years, many cultures and religions have held festivals of light at this time of the year. The beckoning power of light in the darkness is a compelling symbol of hope and warmth. So this is in 2021. She writes, in the Jewish calendar, Hanukkah came very early this year, so that the little candles of the menorah will be sorely missed, especially as we head into the darkest and coldest days of winter. And I thought it was really cool this year that Hanukkah fell entirely after the winter solstice during the peak of the American Gentile holiday season, a really different experience of the holiday this year in 2020, or last year in 2024 than in 2021. So she writes about the Gemara we just learned. The Talmud speaks of the winter solstice in Avodah Zarah, page 788, where it mentions two pagan holidays, Kalenda and Saturnalia, which take place 8 days before and 8 days after the winter solstice. But the Talmud explains that Adam HaRishon, the original human being, was actually the originator of these winter solstice festivals. Interestingly, not the Maccabees or the rabbis of the Talmud, and not those in the Christian tradition either. It all goes back to Adam HaRishon, the first human. When Adam saw that daylight was diminishing progressively, he initially thought it was because of his sin. He was reviewing what we already learned, and that the world is returning to primordial chaos and disorder. He spent 8 days fasting and in prayer as signs of his repentance, all, interestingly, Jewish responses to impending tragedy. So the Talmud is making this Jewish gloss, of course, over our understanding of the first human being. However, when the month of Tevet arrived along with the winter solstice, again, give or take, he saw that the days began to lengthen and realized that the shortening and lengthening of days was simply the order of the world, not because of something bad he had done. To his credit, he recognized that it was not his actions, not the prayer and fasting that he did that brought about the desired change, but the hand of God. Okay, so going back for a moment to this idea of month of Tevet along with the winter solstice, it's interesting that Hanukkah falls on the new moon closest to the winter solstice. So the fall and winter holidays, I think we're all relatively familiar with Rosh Hashanah falling in the autumn season, in the autumnal equinox. So that we have the month after that, Cheshvan, then Kislev, then Tevet. So the month of Tevet, the Rosh Chodesh Tevet, is always in the middle of Hanukkah, always near the winter solstice. Okay, so I wanted to speak about why is it that Hanukkah falls on the 25th of Kislev? The first day of Hanukkah is always on the 25th of Kislev every year. So Hanukkah is one of the few Jewish holidays not mentioned in the Bible. The story of how Hanukkah came to be is contained, of course, in the books of Maccabees, which are not part of the Jewish canon of the Hebrew Bible. Now, the Talmud gives an alternative explanation, which we'll get to in a moment. But in the books of Maccabees, we read that a small band of Jewish fighters who liberated the land of Israel from the Syrian Greeks who occupied it under the reign of Antiochus V Epiphanes. The Syrian Greeks sought to impose their Hellenistic culture, which many Jews found attractive. So this idea of, and we can relate to this today, of being compelled to join in the non-Jewish traditions that perhaps might surround us, and how do we do that, and how do we integrate that into our lives as Jews? This was the struggle on the table at the time. By 167 BC, Antiochus intensified his campaign by defiling a temple in Jerusalem and banning Jewish practice. Obviously, when it gets to that point, it's a problem. And the Maccabees, led by the 5 sons of the priest Mattathias, especially Judah, waged a 3-year campaign that culminated in the cleaning and rededication of the temple, which we actually celebrate every single day when we read Psalm 30. Now, they decided, since they were unable to celebrate the holiday of Sukkot at its proper time in early autumn, because the temple was not rededicated yet, the victorious Maccabees decided that Hanukkah should be essentially Sukkot redo, that they should celebrate it once they rededicated the temple, which they did in the 25th of the month of Kislev in the year 164 BCE. Since Sukkot lasts 7 days, this became the time frame, since Sukkot lasts 7 days in the land of Israel, it's 8 days outside of the land of Israel, the 8-day time frame became adopted for Hanukkah. Now, the Talmud says, actually, it wasn't about winning this battle. It was about when they rededicated the temple, and this is the story that we all know very well. They only had enough oil to last 1 day. It miraculously lasted all 8 days, and hooray, it's about the miracle of oil. We kind of gloss over the part about the battle and the struggle, and we focus on the miracle. And I think the reason why it's so compelling for us to focus on the miracle is because these festivals of light, whether it's Adam HaRishon or Hanukkah, it's about the transition from despair to hope. When we go into these short days of the year, it feels like the light is never going to come back, and what are we ever going to do? But when the days start to lengthen, and we light those candles and we see them in the dark night, we feel that hope. So in this week's Parasha, we learn that the transition from despair to hope is not an easy transition. When Joseph reveals himself to his brothers and is like, hey, I'm your brother, everything is going to be fine. The brothers are very skeptical. They're like, I can't even take this information in. He's going to take Benjamin. There's speechlessness. There's eventually tears, and then people kind of start to feel better about it. Similarly, when Jacob learns that Joseph is still alive, he doesn't believe it at first. His other sons have to tell the story and convince him, no, this is actually going to happen. This is actually a thing. And when Jacob and Joseph reunite, again, there's tears. That movement from despair to hope. Just like Adam HaRishon, just like Joseph and his family, we too need to move from despair to hope, whether it's because the days are getting shorter and then longer or because of other things that are happening in our personal lives. We have to take this transition from despair to hope. It's not always easy. So this year, as we're enjoying the progression of the winter season and the lengthening of the days, may we always embrace hope, even if it means a couple of moments of crying tears of disbelief in the process. Shabbat Shalom.